VDA recently released an assessor's guideline. So can you tell us a little bit about what will be the implication of that assessor's guideline in terms of companies who are willing to be ASPICE level 2, level 3? What will be the implication, how they should prepare for it?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So beginning of last year, VDA published a special good, a so-called Blue Gold book. Yeah? So it's not really a requirement. It's more a guideline how to interpret and how to perform assessments. So we are now not in the area that the suppliers have the task to fulfill something. But what is the scope of an assessor who has to judge, who has to evaluate a supplier if he is doing a good work, if he has good processes in place in order to develop software and systems. So in the past it happened a lot that the result of an automotive SPICE assessment, if a supplier is reaching a certain capability level, depended on the background of the assessor, on the experience background. And the automotive SPICE model itself only defines the what level, what shall be there. So for example, develop a software architectural design. Okay, that's it. You need a kind of evidence, a kind of work product that shows how is your software structured. It doesn't tell you how to do it. With which tool, with which method. Is there any role, a specific role necessary to do it? That's completely open. And depending on the familiarity of the assessor, if he knows how a good architecture looks like, the results will differ. If the assessor has not a good background in software architecture, then maybe he will accept some kind of pictures that show something. If he's not able to understand it, then he will maybe tend to give a good rating. An assessor who is very, very familiar with software architecture will go into the will do a deep dive and maybe find some minor weaknesses, but is using then these weaknesses to downgrade this process. So completely different result, maybe within the same project. So objectivity of assessment results was one of the main goals of this assessor guideline. That's why it's called assessment guideline, mainly for the performance of assessments. And it gives a lot of good guidelines and examples what to look for, what to ask for the specific base practices of automotive SPICE. It's not complete, and it's even not without any faults, of course. So there's still a lot of room of interpretation. But especially for the beginners, for young assessors, I think it's a very useful guideline. That gives you some hints what to ask for. Especially the scope of an assessment. I very often face the challenge in the meantime that the complexity of the project is very, very different. You can have very simple projects where a standard software is developed with a standard functionality, but you also have to assess some complex software where we have some basic software with operating systems, conformant to AUTOSAR, for example, with an application software that is developed by a completely different team, maybe by a completely different company. Sometimes the OEM is also supplying some parts of the software. And in such a complex setup, if you do not define in detail what is the scope of the assessment, the result can be completely different. Do you really assess the complete project in order to evaluate the project risk? Or do you want to evaluate the maturity of one part of the product, or of one company who provides only one part of the complete product? So the scope of the assessment must be defined in a very detailed way. And this is a very good part in this assessor guideline, to focus on the scope definition, and also depending on the scope definition, which kind of rules and recommendations to use. That's, I think, the very positive aspect. On the other side, the guideline is also defining rules without directly referring to technical aspects. So for example, in each process area we have around 10 base practices. Some only 5, some have 12, but in average 8 to 10 practices. And then there are some rules that say, okay, if you downgrade one practice, you have to downgrade also other practices. If you read the content of the practices, of course, you will find out there is a certain relationship. But many of these rules are defined in a way that only depending on the result, you should modify another result. Yeah? And this tends to the behavior of some inexperienced assessors not to check the content of the rating anymore, but just to follow rules. I've already seen some assessment results with a justification. Yeah, I downloaded that because of rule 265, for example, yeah? Without giving a justification regarding the content. Yeah? And this is the risk with that guideline, yeah? Not to focus on the content, yeah, anymore. And if the content is the right one for this particular project or company, but only focusing on rules, yeah? Only following rules. In that case, the experience of the assessor, yeah, does not play such a big role anymore. Yeah? And that's what I like with my job, yeah? That I can use my experience and my knowledge, yeah? In order to decide what is a good, efficient way to implement processes for this particular company. Yeah? And this is a certain risk if you purely follow only that guideline.